Victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat is an orphan. John F. Kennedy. Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I am your host, Shamiza Ali. Our topic tonight is allegations of corruption and economic prosperity. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, the UK, Canada, the Caribbean, and Guyana. Funding support is by well-known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Please welcome my moderator for tonight, Dr. Tara Singh, who is a distinguished political and social scientist.
Thank you very much, Shamiza, and welcome to our viewers.
Welcome, Dr. Tara. Our panelist is Professor Muniram Budu. Our guest tonight is a financial analyst and the director of Spherex, Mr. Joel Bhagwandin.
Good
Welcome,
evening, and
everyone.
thank you. Good evening. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Dr. Tara, we'll go right into those videos. Do you want to give a little explanation of what we're about to show our viewers?
No, go ahead. You go ahead and do it.
Okay. So here is some videos that we would like you to pay attention to.
My name is Sandra McAllister. Many of you would know me from 2020 on the other side of the aisle. But I can tell you, I have joined forces with my brother and friend Irfan because I believe in his vision. A vision which he personally outlined to me. I'm not giving away too many secrets. Which he personally outlined to me, and as a young person, I feel that this is a grand time to be alive in this cooperative republic. I want to end just where the chairman ended, and to encourage you that these elections that are upcoming will determine the future of this country. And so, sorry, H.E., my presentation will get a bit political. So I want to encourage you to stay the course with my friend and brother. You have seen firsthand the development from 2020 to date. Imagine what he will do with another term. I trust his vision. I trust his word. His word is his bond. I have proven that. I've known him for many years. And I'm saying to you, trust him with another term. Trust him with Guyana's future. He has demonstrated that he is a man for all seasons. He has demonstrated that he is a president of the people, by the people, and for the people. And Region 3, in these elections, your votes are critical. Chairman said 70,000. I'm going to challenge you to give me 80,000 votes. Thank you.
In Guyana, a long-awaited national project is underway, the formal construction of the Linden to Letham Highway. This 450-kilometre corridor will create a reliable, all-weather link from the coast to the Brazilian border. Funded through a $190 million loan from Brazil, the project replaces what was once a dirt road, often washed out and impassable, with engineered asphalt and bridges built to modern standards. Travel time will shrink from over 12 hours to just 4 year-round. Transport costs will drop. Hinterland communities, many indigenous, will gain direct access to healthcare, markets and education. Strategically, this highway connects Guyana to Brazil's northern state of Roraima, opening trade routes to over 200 million people, and positioning Guyana as a key logistics and export hub. It is one of the most significant infrastructure projects in Guyana's modern history, unlocking economic opportunity, regional trade, and national unity.
Dr. Tara.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not seeing
Joel
or
I
Chris.
tried to
I'm
join.
I'm here,
Okay,
but I
Okay.
have blackout. So and I have an whatever backup battery I have right now. So I could
oh,
probably speak, but you won't see
yeah,
me until my backup battery dies, or
okay,
hopefully if the power comes on
all
before then.
right. All right. I want to take this opportunity to welcome our viewers, and I know that Professor Boudou was away for a few weeks. He was on a long tour in Africa and the Far East. Um, and maybe if you get some time, we'll ask him to highlight some of the developments taking place there that may have some relevance or application to Guyana. I was asked to make an announcement before this program. As you know, the government announced that people who have contributed to the national IS but didn't reach a maximum of 750 contributions will still get a lump sum payment. Now they divide that into four sections. People who earn, who have, who had 500 to 549 contributions will get $260,000 one-time payment. People who made 550 to 599 contributions will get 390,000, and people who made 600 to 699 contributions will get 520,000, and people who made 700 to 749 will get 650,000. That's a one-off payment. So that's good news. A lot of people had great frustration with the NIS not getting their money in time and processing, but the vice president said that this money is payable almost immediately. So people should check with the various NIS officers. Um, yeah, today we have a very interesting conversation with financial analyst and the director of Spherex, who is also a prolific writer in the various papers and appearing in various programs, Mr. Joel Bhagwandin, one of the rising stars in Guyana. Um, um, I I think that allegations of corruption are very rampant in Guyana. Now, I just want to make this very clear. No country in the world is free of corruption. What any country can do is to control the level of corruption. They can't eliminate it. No country can eliminate it. We just look at America, for example, and say the massive amount of corruption that is being detected now is really unbelievably incredible. So the thing is, America is a rich country, so I guess they can afford the shocks of corruption. Now, so the trouble with corruption in Guyana is that both parties benefit, so there's very little reluctance to report such activities. Um, no one can deny that there is no corruption in Guyana. The vice president had said that. Um, GCOM commissioner, who is also a part, formerly a member of the government, Mr. Rohi, everybody know that there is corruption, but the thing is to get the evidence. And what extent we don't know. We know that in 2015, several former PAP ministers, including the vice president, was hauled before Soku unquestioned. Some of them were even handcuffed and taken for allegations of corruption, even though they conducted over 40 to 50 forensic audit, they could find no evidence. So, and right now, I think the PNC, they have one or two ministers in court on allegations of corruption. Now, most of the corrupt activities happen in the area of procurement. And we have someone who is very knowledgeable in that area, who is a member of the Public Procurement Commission, Joel Bhagwandin. So, Joel, can we start with that before we talk about economic prosperity? Let's deal a little with the issue of corruption, which is going to become a very powerful political arguments in the upcoming elections. Joel, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Tara Singh. Good evening. Forgive me for my blank screen. I'm currently suffering from the blackout, and I'm on the backup battery with my Wi-Fi. So if you see I'm gone, it means my battery is out and the power is not back on. All right.
Mm,
Um. So I like how you've opened your opening statement with respect to corruption and the allegations of corruption. And from my experience, and particularly from where I sit at the Procurement Commission, as you mentioned, I think the allegations of corruption far outweighs the actual uh, cases of corruption that we currently are aware of or that we have before us. And I would like to expand on those very examples that you have cited with the current members of the current administration, executive members of the current administration, the vice president, and the sitting minister of finance, who were in under the APNU AFC tenure during that 2015-2020 period, who were hauled before the courts and handcuffed. If we are to compare those cases and compare and contrast those cases with those that we have now, it's chalk and cheese. And I can give you a couple of specifics. For example, let's take the case with the Minister Ashley Singh and the former head of NISIL at that time, Brassington. They were hauled before the court for a number of transactions that were fully in compliance with the procurement rules in terms of the public tendering process, in terms of the entire execution of those transactions were in keeping with the procurement regulation and the Procurement Act. And in fact, there is one only 2 days ago, I was reading a so-called audit report, forensic audit report that was conducted at that time on NISIL, on a one of the subsidiaries that NISIL managed or, or fall under the purview of NISIL, that was conducted by a former, well, not former, a current EFC op- opposition member, Charles Sugrim, and that report is public on the Minister of Finance website. The report found no breach whatsoever with any law. The findings of the report gave NISIL and the administration at that time, which is the current administration, a clean slate with respect to that particular transaction upon which the audit was done, the forensic audit. And that's I would say that's an authoritative report, right? That was an actual forensic audit conducted to uncover whether there was any financial or procurement irregularity, and none whatsoever was found. And so then the process in which those well I'll get to that. Let me conclude with respect to the transaction. So the transactions that the minister Ashley Singh was hauled before the courts for, there was no evidence of any wrongdoing. There was no evidence of any irregularity. There was no evidence of any breaches of the procurement laws and regulation. Contrast that now to current cases before the court. Take, for example, the feasibility study for the Demerara Harbor Bridge that was that was conducted by the former APNU AFC government. That process was breached from the beginning to the end. First, the then Minister of Public Works, entertained an unsolicited proposal, which is in violation of the procurement law. You're not supposed to entertain unsolicited proposal. So he entertained an unsolicited proposal. He took it to the cabinet. sought no objection from the cabinet, and there's a report done by the Public Procurement Commission that is in the public domain, in which an investigation was triggered. And what I'm giving you here is a more or less the findings of that report into that investigation. So he took it to the cabinet, sought no objection, and an award was made to this company that has no track record, no evidence of any track record of doing any such studies before, and that was to the tune of over 200 million, over $100 million or 200 million thereabout. So the entire process from the beginning to the end was in flagrant violation of the procurement regulations and the Procurement Act. Now, I'm giving you examples here. That is one example of a matter that has been investigated, and there are many other examples that are currently before the courts where there are flagrant violation of the procurement regulations and the procurement law, right? So it's chalk and cheese. Then, interestingly, even in, or I should say, ironically, the award of these contracts to the auditors to perform these forensic audits, even those were in, and I've written extensively on these, even those that were facilitated by the former government were in flagrant violation of the procurement rules. Take, for example, the same, well, I can't speak specifically for the one conducted by Charles Grim because I haven't gone to the extent to investigate how that was awarded, but I can speak on the former Auditor General Anand Gulsharan, for example, where he implicated himself. He said publicly in one of his columns that the then Minister of Finance called him and asked him which they have these forensic audits to conduct. Which one does he want? Give him the option to choose which audit he want to conduct, which agencies he want, in flagrant violation of the Audit Act as well as the Procurement Act. And I've written extensively, extensively on those. So I use those citations that you made to give a little bit more specifics to the example with respect to allegations of corruption that are propagated within our society, especially heightened allegations during this election season that is coming up, and the differences, the differences between these specific case examples. Now,
Mhm.
that is not to say, as you've correctly mentioned, that the system is corruption free. We all know that corruption does exist. To what extent is a different matter. And what I would venture to say is to what extent the institutions that we have to deal with issues of corruption or allegations of corruption, to what extent those institutions are utilized, to what extent those who make allegations of corruption, they actually use the institution to make the necessary report so that you could trigger the relevant investigation and so forth. And where I sit, for example, if you read the media, if you peruse the pages of mainstream media, you would find on a daily basis uh, many allegations of corruption. But when you measure that up to, say, for example, let's say, for example, we have issues of procurement, allegations of procurement irregularities, and I see many of that in the public domain. How many of those reports find its way to the Public Procurement Commission? And I can give you specific statistics, right, to support what I'm saying. The statistics that I have, that I have at that entity, at that agency, in 2024, for example, we have only had about 10 complaints. Now, that is 10 complaints from emanating from suppliers, people who companies that participated in bidding process, and the majority of the complaints were from politicians on opposition politicians, members of parliament. Majority of the complaints, more from politicians, less from actual suppliers who participated in a public process and who were actual parties that would have some sort of legitimate grievances. 10, and guess how much contracts were awarded in 2024? Over 3,000. So that's less than 1% of contracts, public sector contracts that was awarded in a given year. Less than 1%, the requisite institution wherever a grievance exists, or let's say legitimate concerns of irregularity, suspicions of irregularity, or presumptions of irregularity, whatever the case is, only 10 complaints. Only 10 complaints. So I'll pause there for now,
Yeah.
and allow you the opportunity to ask.
Okay. Thank you. Professor Badu, over to you.
Yeah. Joel, good to see you. I can't see you though, but saw you earlier. Um, I think Dr. Singh mentioned about no country is free from corruption, and he's correct. I'm sure you're aware of what this index called the Corruption Perception Index. Are you?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Now, Denmark is the least corrupt for a number of years with a 2024 score of 90. So obviously 100 means no corruption. So that means there's some corruption in Denmark. Guyana has a 2024 CPI. That CPI is the Corruption Perception Index of 40. A few years ago, it was around 20. I know the CPI is seriously flawed because it is a perception index. It is a qualitative, not quantitative. It is one of those indices created by the colonial masters as a facade to ding developing countries, and we normally fall for it. Why do you think that Guyana always gets a low score compared to, say, Barbados with a CPI of 68?
So, Professor, I thank you. I thank you for making reference to that corruption perception index. Um, incidentally, the last corruption index reported, I had actually did some work on that, and I'm looking for a letter that I had written in the public domain on it, and I just want to point out a couple of key things that I found wrong with that. So I have the letter in front of me, but I don't want to go through. I don't want to read it out to bore the audience, the listening audience. But what I would tell you, from what I've found, is that you are correct. Of course, you're a man of far more wisdom and experience than me, so you know the reality of the workings of the world well, way more than I do. And from my own independent research and findings, I found that the index is, I would label it, I would go as far as to say it's a fraudulent index. Because when you take, let's take Denmark that scored the highest. Before we get into peeling back the index, what is in that index? Let's look at, if you look at the who finances that agency, more than 60% of the funding for that agency comes from governments, comes from the governments of countries that, who interestingly, they score above 60%. They score up there they're above 60, 70, 80. Interestingly, the countries, and it's transparently on their website, credit to them, the countries that finances the agency, their total funding, more than 60% comes from governments. And when you look at the countries or the government agencies, let's say the government for simplicity of those countries, all those countries, you go through the countries that finances this agency, they all, none of them obtain a score lower than 60%, than 60. None of them. So that's the first point. I want to make. Could you get her off, please? Take her outside. Yeah, none of them obtain a score lower than 60. The second point, the second finding that I came across from my own research, when you look at actual perception is one thing, but when you look at the country Denmark is part of the OECD anti-corruption framework in terms of the legislative framework, etc. And when you're a member country of when you subscribe to a treaty or a framework or an international standard vis-a-vis a group or an agency such as the OECD or whether the United Nations, one of the United Nations treaty, you're bound by that which you signed on to. And the recent report conducted by the OECD that was an assessment of Denmark's anti corruption framework in terms of their implementation and a complete assessment of the anti corruption framework, not just implementation, but effectiveness of the anti corruption framework. They score below the average. They obtain a score of below less than 40%. The average for all the OECD member countries that are signatories to that framework, the average is 40%. 40% adopted. Denmark is below, way below the average. So facts versus fiction. So those are just two. I'm not going to get into all the details, but I'm just citing two examples. And anybody could conduct, just like how I did this independently. Anybody could go and look for those reports, look for those assessments, and to ascertain factually what is the state of affairs of the anti-corruption framework of Denmark versus a country like Guyana. We too are subject to. Our Guyana is a signatory to several treaties. We're a signatory to the FATCA framework. We're a signatory to the United Nations anti-corruption framework. Our laws are shaped based. We've adopted by virtue of signing on to those treaties. Our legislation was adopted in keeping with those treaties, our anti-money laundering legislation, and a whole range of other institutions that were established, the Financial Intelligence Unit, SOCU, and all these other agencies and institutions. And these agencies, FATCA, um, sorry, not FATCA, FATF, FATF, the international body, and CFATF, which is um, the Caribbean arm of FATF. They conduct country assessments as well. You also have the International Monetary Fund that conducts these country assessments, which include the anti-corruption and assessment of the anti-corruption framework, our anti-corruption framework. And when you read the independent assessments performed by these bodies, take for example the Article 4 report of the IMF that was recently done, our most recent country assessment by CFATF, and so on, you will see that over the years there are marked improvements. We're not perfect, we're not 100%, but we have seen marked improvements. And when you look at the effectiveness, we are seeing that more and more cases that are being prosecuted. We've seen how many cases, Soko, for instance, gold smuggling cases being uprooted. Persons are being prosecuted who are perpetrating those crimes. Tax evasion, we have some of the biggest cases of tax evasion right now engaging uh, the authorities and the attention of these institutions and so on. So our institutions are working, um, and the report's independent assessment on the anti corruption framework of the country, conducted by these agencies that I mentioned earlier, have shown that there are marked improvements. We're improving, we're getting there. Not perfect, but we're getting there.
All right, Professor Budu, any follow up?
Yeah, I think corruption, any form of corruption is bad, right? Uh, and I think corruption is layered with politicians at the top. I want to ask Joel, what, where in government service, including the judiciary and the public service and security, that corruption is prevalent?
Well, I can't tell you where corruption, what level of government corruption is prevalent. There is certainly perceptions out there. There is
Mm,
speculations out there at what level.
mm,
But I could speak from only my experience.
mm,
And from my experience in the various capacities that I operate, corruption is more prevalent at the lower and the mid level. I can't speak so much for the top level or the top tier level because I'm not exposed to that level and I have no basis whatsoever to make any such speculation. But from the capacities in which I currently operate, the prevalence is predominantly at the mid level and the lower level across all agencies.
All right, Dr. Ganga.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tara. Joel, nice to hear you again. I can't see you, but I know what you look like. Um, the last time you were here, I had no problem with the procurement process that you had outlined. And I think you summarized it briefly here. And I still don't have any problem with the process at the top there in the procurement commission's work. However, as you mentioned, lower level at the operational levels, that's where corruptions are targeted and spawned. So the question is, what watchdog institutions do we have for the lower levels in terms of operations? We have our players. You have of course, you have government there at the top. They are concerned with corruption, but lower down you have players. You have especially the contractors. These are the players. So what watchdog institutions are there to monitor their behavior and also the audits and license and inspections that should really be in the tail of the projects. We should be monitoring those as well at these lower levels which you just mentioned. Can you comment on the watchdog institutions that exist in Guyana?
So it's difficult to comment on. I'm not sure what you mean by watchdog institutions. You mentioned audit and so on. Um, I don't know if the auditors are considered watchdog, but if you ask me, I mean, I could deduce a different interpretation from watchdog, and I think there are many watchdog outside of those institutions that you mentioned. If you're referring to the Auditor General, I think the media is a watchdog. I think the public is a watchdog because a lot of the issues, particularly those that are some of the issues that are engaging or that have been engaging uh, action by the. Oh, we have power is back on. So let me see if you can see me now.
Ah, yeah.
Perfect. Joel, before you continue, as soon as you're done with your comment, we will take a quick break, Dr. Tara.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So
Joel. Let
Okay?
me let me just zero in on this.
Yeah.
The qualifications of contractors and the qualifications of the subcontractors. How do we dovetail that to make sure that public interest is served in terms of the right people getting those contracts?
so so all right. Let me take that as an example. Maybe I might probably take a while explaining this. I don't know if you want to take the break here.
You might gather your thoughts while I
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so
Probably
let's
take
take that
about
break.
five
Right
minutes.
now
Yeah,
we'll come back with
yeah,
the answers. Yeah.
yeah.
We're back. Please go ahead, Joel.
So thank you. So let me tell you a little bit of what the watchdog institution where I sit as a commissioner, what we're doing, and the work that we're doing, as well as the executive, which is the government, that is, which is a matter of public knowledge, and through our engagement with the attorney general chambers and so on. So, from our observation from the work that we have done, you mentioned qualifications of contractors and subcontractors. One of the things that the government has made publicly made known is that there's a sickening issue where contractors are on the bidding for work and to win the work, and then they subcontract out the work. And that is one of many other reasons why we have a lot of substandard work. And these are issues that are engaging our attention, the Public Procurement Commission attention, as well as the government's attention. And I can tell you that there's a series of legislative reforms that we are currently putting together and that the government is simultaneously working on as well, that we will see maybe not this year, but maybe in the next term, because it's a lot of work that have gone into the reforms, a comprehensive reform that we alone have put together with what we are aware that the government has done, including looking at the contracts, strengthening the contracts, putting in terms in there, looking at engineers. There's a lot of issues. A lot of the issues that we find is with poor supervision, with the engineers as well who are not held accountable. The current law as it is does not provide for penalty. There's not much penalty that you can impose upon an engineer, for example. And so maybe that is one of the reasons why we still have a lot of problems. So there's a series of legislative reforms that will be effected, that we are also contributing to making those reforms that will address a lot of the concerns, a lot of the issues in the public procurement system. Outside of the reforms, one of the key things that I think would also minimize the very issue that you mentioned, that would speak to contractors' qualification and so on, was is the implementation of moving to an e-procurement system, which would eliminate the current manual system, which is susceptible to all sorts of you know errors, mistakes, irregularities, mischief. you know so the e-procurement, when we move to e-procurement, I think that too will address will minimize a lot of the issues in terms of procurement irregularities, etc. So there's a lot of work that is being done that does not really receive much publicity, but there's a lot of work being done in that regard to improve the system and to minimize these occurrences.
All right, Dr.
Yeah,
Garner.
yeah, that's good news that will have the e-procurement system. Now, what we also need to consider is a wider definition of project management, and this must include something from the government side to have some kind of oversight on the project itself. So the end result is as expected. We don't have deviations in terms of quality standards and the actual output that was planned. We need to monitor and have feedback much more sooner, so that corrective actions can be taken in the project stage, and not to wait for bad results to affect the whole country and its finances.
Okay,
So,
yeah. Okay, Dr. Ganga, that's the same point Professor Bodu has been making all along. To get proper and effective project management. But we got to move on to the other section. I mean, we can talk on corruption. There's so many areas we got to cover, but we want to go to the area of economic prosperity. Now, Dr. Ganga, I know you're economist. You're head of the Department of Economics and International Relations at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Plus, you at one time you were head of a section of the Bank of Guyana. Do you think we should measure economic prosperity in terms of the Human Development Index? You know, the Human Development Index comprises four criteria. One is your how many years of schooling, then your mean years of schooling, GNI per capita, and life expectancy. Those are the four they pull together to develop the Human Development Index. Now, Dr. Ganga, I want you to make a quick comment before I pass on this question to Joel and then to Professor Bodu.
okay, the traditional indices start with income, production, income, and then it moves to the wider environment, which include the inputs, labor inputs, the environment, and other qualitative factors. So you would need to start with, of course, we're always doing this GDP, and then gross national income. There's a big gap there that caused Guyana to be reclassified as a high income country. And I would like Joel to comment on that um, difference between GDP and GNI. Now, if we want to add other layers of evaluation, such as the quality of labor and so forth, that's a much broader based uh, index. We can also add to that the environment in which labor functions, safety, and so forth, and the health and safety standards in place. So yes, you can have a broader index.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. Before I pass on to Joel, Professor Bodu, you want to make a comment before Joel respond?
Yeah, well, my comment is actually on the left side, really. All of these indices that people are talking about are just numbers, right? It is how people perceive their life, right? It's by life improvement, right? And that is what the measurement should be, right? These numbers, in fact, a lot of these numbers are created by academics and by colonial masters, again, as I said before, to ding developing countries, right? And I've seen a lot of these things going on in my recent trip to Southeast Asia, which I could talk a little about later. But these indices, we have to need to be very careful how we use the indices to measure anything that is taking place in developing countries, because they're not made for us, right? They're made for other purposes.
Joel?
So I concur with Professor Professor Boudou. Those index, they don't necessarily. I mean, if we want to keep it, if we look at it technically and we look at where we are positioned on those index or indices, because there are various indices. You have the Human Development Index, you have the GDP, GNI, and others. If you look at those indices, you would see that Guyana is moving upwards in terms of meaning we're improving on those index. But I concur with Professor Boudou's viewpoints because the index don't really tell you the full story. And we can all develop our own we can all develop our own metrics of how we want to measure prosperity because I think prosperity has to be measured based upon how one defines prosperity. How I define prosperity might not be the same way you define prosperity. But if at all we are to agree on a national framework of what constitutes prosperity at a national level, that would be for me a prosperous nation or a prosperous country. You want a good healthcare system because you want a healthy population. So prosperity has to be measured from that perspective, from healthcare, meaning a healthy population. That means you have to invest in your in the health sector. Education, you want an educated population. That means we have to invest in the education sector. Investing in the education sector means we have to make education accessible, affordable. That means you have to invest in the infrastructure, physical infrastructure. We have to invest in the curriculum, improving the curriculum. We have to invest in the people who are delivering, train our teachers, etc., to, to achieve the desired outcome, which is an educated population. Then we want our people, healthy population, educated population. We also want now our people to have access to opportunities, job in the form of job opportunities, in the form of entrepreneurial opportunities, and so that people can undertake investment, lucrative investment. So we have to create the environment that would create those opportunities, open avenues for new opportunities. And so that's the broad framework in which I would measure prosperity as opposed to just looking at these index and how are we
Okay,
performing on the index.
let me just
So
answer this question. When the government says that it will bring economic prosperity to every Guyanese, what do you think the government means by that?
in simple terms, what the government means, the government simply means we want our people to have better paying jobs. We want our people to have the ability to earn, to increase their earnings, to maximize their accumulation of wealth, and that can be obtained in many different forms, which we are providing those avenues for you to do so in the form of earning capacity, in the form of investment capacity, in the form of accumulating assets, home ownership, land ownership, etc., providing incentives if you want to make an investment in a particular sector, right? So, and if we're to look at a couple of, let's look at a few other variables that would constitute those indices that we talked about earlier. Let's take income, for example. We want our people to have better paying jobs, and we want our people to earn more. So if we look at income, and I've looked at the growth in income from using 2014 as the base year to 2024, and I'll tell you the methodology which I use to calculate this. So personal income tax, we know what is we can calculate the effective income tax rate, and therefore you can mathematically calculate your net disposable income based on personal income tax data that is publicly available. So when you do that calculation from 2014 to 2024, We've seen that income has risen nearly sixfold from 70 billion, and this is the tax bracket, because remember, there is a threshold under which, below that threshold, people earning below that threshold, they're not paying taxes, so they would not be captured in this segment that I'm referring to. So we're excluding the segment of the workforce who are below the income tax threshold and would not be required to pay taxes. So those who are paying taxes alone, income has risen from 2014 to now from 70 billion to over 400 billion. Over 400 billion. So we're seeing tangible, that's a tangible measurement in terms of income, net disposable income. That is also consistent with the rate of increase in deposits, individual deposits in the banking sector. Deposits in the banking sector has also increased by more than twofold in that period. Let's look at car ownership in this country. Car ownership has gone from 1 in every 5 persons owning a car to 2 in every 5 persons owning a car. We've gone from when you have about 10,000 cars being registered over a period of maybe 5 years. Now we have maybe 30,000 cars registering in 1 year, in a single year. Housing, home ownership. You look at the rate of mortgage loans, real estate loan in the banking sector, gone up significantly by has more than tripled from 2014. So home ownership, more people owning homes, more people owning cars, vehicles, more people are earning more, right? And that's only how many three indicators. So and how did we achieve those results? Those results could not have been achieved without the direct policy of the government, the type of policy that they pursue, the way in which they manage the economy, the investments that they make in the economy in all the various sectors, particularly in the non-oil sector, the agriculture sector, the mining and agriculture sector, and so on. So I'll pause there for now.
So based on your analysis there, are you saying that almost every household has been touched by your definition of economic prosperity? Um, Now, you have an important question there. There are lots of people in the system who still feel powerless, who don't feel that they are part of the system. How do you explain that in terms of your general understanding of what the government believes? As far as I know, the government has a number of things which they said they will empower people, but they never defined clearly what they mean by economic prosperity. Because
Mm.
some people might feel contented and happy without all these material things. So people attitudes are very important in all these physical indicators. So if you
So
want to comment.
can you give like a specific example, because you're giving me a very broad statement, and you
No,
just
what I'm saying is that the government has been using this concept, economic prosperity, to all Guyanese. I don't think I've seen any operational definition of that by the government. Now, we can allude, I mean, housing, you empower people through housing, education, jobs, etc. That's fine. But we can do all these, but still people feel they are not part of the process. They have been left out, they have been alienated from the system. So, my point is that these physical indicators must be accompanied by some attitudinal change that is very fundamental. So let me ask, before I go to, let me ask Dr. Ganga and Professor Budu to comment on that before I come back to you.
Joel mentioned two important things. You mentioned income And you mentioned ownership. Now, land ownership is important to supplement your hands and feet. So you need additional resources in order to get up the ladder of prosperity. Now, here's a specific question. When we look at production and income only, we define domestically the GDP. Guyana was classified as a poor country and it moved to become a rich country when they used the gross national income indicator. So, in terms of this gap between how do you move or what's responsible to move from GDP to gross national income, how do you explain that?
So
That's the
so
first
so,
level.
so yeah. So I'll
All right.
go back. I'll go back
Oh,
to no no.
hold
no,
on.
I'll go.
Let me get and you can answer both. Professor Budu.
Well, I think we need to be very careful. I agree with Joel. The government is actually focusing on the right areas, but we have to look and see what historically what has happened in countries that are undergoing all these kinds of transformation. What you see happen, there is not equal opportunities for everyone. That is there. There's much more disparity that you get. Some people get richer because some people, of course, simply don't want to take the opportunities available, or they don't qualify for these opportunities that are available, right? So you look at any country that go through this transformation, you see disparity, right? Then you see that they inherit the same problems that developing countries have because they didn't plan for that, plan correctly for it. For example, you see a lot of these countries I've seen, there's a lot of depression, right? There a lot of people feel like they're left out of the system. Let me just before Tara, I'm gonna be very quick here. Let me tell you, and in terms of people's understanding, the perception of what's happening during transformation. I just came back from Southeast Asia. I was in Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and in South Korea. These countries, I've been there 10 years ago. These countries are transforming rapidly, just like Guyana, right? And when I ask people there uh, about this transformation, you know the first thing they tell me? Why there's a lot of corruption, right? But when I told him that there's a lot of opportunities here, he said, "Yeah, yeah, mom, we're getting our life is improving. Right? We're able to buy this, we're able to buy that, we're able to do all of these things, right?" So there has to be an attitude change, right? So you can have all these transformations take place unless people start to change their mind. There's a state of mind that's been created. And in Guyana, let me give an example. In Guyana, a Guyanese may look and see a four-lane road being constructed, right? And the first thing that comes to him or her mind is that there's a lot of corruption taking place because over the years that has happened, right? And they see this is just bigger corruption, right? They don't see that the opportunities available. So this state of mind has to change, right? How you change it is not easy, but government must have a program to transcend the people, not only participate in transformation, infrastructure transformation, but it must be able to transcend the people.
All right. JC.
So so let me take Dr. Ganga's question,
Mhm.
and then I'll launch into. I like the way Professor Budu is going with this in terms of how he frames, how he articulates the thinking on the subject. The question that Professor Ganga Ramdas poses is more of a technical nature. The differences in GNI and GDP and the classification of Guyana to a high income country on the basis of GNI by the World Bank. What accounted for that is when you adjust, the World Bank would do the adjustment for purchasing power parity. And if you adjust our GD or per capita income or GNI on a PPP basis, PPP meaning purchasing power parity, not PPPC, um, you would get maybe two times what it actually is in nominal terms. And purchasing parity adjustments really accounts for differences in prices across countries. So that's what it is, and that's the basis. And Professor Ganga Ramdas, he's an economist of far greater pedigree than I am, so he knows these technical matters. He's an expert in these technical matters, way more than I am. I'm still a student to him. So that aside, take the technicalities and so on of those metrics aside. Let's talk about it from a lay perspective. Forget about the adjustment to purchasing power parity. The fact remains, from a resources standpoint, from a natural resources standpoint, and from a production basis of the country, meaning from GDP, the simple GDP basis, production basis. And when you look at expenditure, consumption expenditure alone is 25% of GDP. That's $1.4 trillion. That is almost the size of the entire budget. And you know what was consumption expenditure in this country 10 years ago? In relationship to GDP, 8%. So we have a population that has way more spending power today, from 8% of GDP to 25% of GDP. That's a massive, massive increase over this period. Coming now to wealth, and to the question I'm trying to juxtaposition it with the question, that the fundamental question that Dr. Tara Singh raised, that some sections of society, while we have all these fancy metrics, fancy GDP, fancy indicators, and all the indicators tell a glowing story of the country, still we have segments of society that feels alienated, that feels they're not in this equation. And where is this wealth? The common question: where is this wealth? Where is this $30 billion? Where is this 30,000 per capita that we talk about? Where is this? It comes back to perspective. It might not necessarily mean for some people that you're making $30,000 a year. You might not be making 30,000 US dollars a year, but if we change our perspective and we really understand the fundamental of GDP and wealth creation and the wealth of the resources of the country, what it really means from a different perspective is, this is the value of opportunity that is available to you to capitalize upon. And the question that we have to ask is not that I am not making 30,000, so this can't be true, and therefore I am eliminated or alienated. The question is, how can I take advantage of these opportunities? How can I unlock these opportunities for myself? How can I benefit? And what you will find is that we have a lot of we have to educate our people. We have to educate our people to learn how to identify opportunities.
Yeah.
Even people who are already in business, they
Yeah.
still need a lot of training and
Yeah.
education, how to identify opportunities, how to develop a
Yeah.
business plan, how to form,
Yeah. All right.
right?
Can I make a quick
Make a
one-liner?
quick thing because we're over time.
Yes, Guyanese at home own assets abroad that are earning income. And that's the difference between GDP at home and the national income, which includes incomes earned abroad. That is the fundamental methodology from the United Nations statistics on income, how you measure income and all of that.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Professor Buru. Your last comment.
Yeah, well, I think that what is important, that what Joel says uh, is going to happen in Guyana. You're going to see, and I've seen this in these other countries where you have this big disparity developing your transformation and economic value. Some people are not taking the opportunities. They don't know how to take the opportunities. So the education is very important, and the government has to get on that bandwagon to educate people how to make use of these opportunities
Mm.
and to realize that costs of things are going to get high. This is what happened. Cost of living increase in all of these countries that I visited that are transforming, right?
Mm.
And people are complaining, but they do not know how to
Yeah.
make use of the opportunities that are available to them.
The trouble is, this transformation must be accompanied by attitudinal transformation
Yeah.
as well. Um, okay, I'm afraid this interesting conversation has to end now because we have exceeded our time. Shamiza, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Tara, and thank you to our panel this evening. This here is just a little comment that we got from Rajendra Singh in regards to your comment, Joel, about Mr. Sukrim. He says Mr. Sukrim is an anti-PPP and maybe a former AFC operative. Now with the OGGN, another bitter and anti-PPP outfit. Don't take him seriously. This question is from Sandra. Sandra is asking, can we get a status on what actions are being taken by the responsible agency of government to investigate all of the complaints of irregularities? And I think you mentioned it was like 10 or 11 of those complaints. So
Yes,
she's just asking what.
all complaints that we receive, and at least the public. I can speak for the Public Procurement Commission. I can't speak for other agencies. I can't speak for the police force. I can't speak for SOCO. I can't speak for the Auditor General. I could speak for the Public Procurement Commission, and all of the complaints that we receive, we investigate all of them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And we have Amanda Khan, and I know this is not in your thing, but she is asking about help for land to build an orphanage for young women that leaves orphanage when they're 18. So if you are aware of any place that Amanda can go to get help, she's looking for land to actually build an orphanage for young ladies who turn 18 and have to leave orphanage.
So
She
she could
should
make an
contact
application. Yeah, she could
the
make an
Ministry of Social Security and Human Services.
yeah. She could
Perfect.
apply. So because of the nature of that, she could apply for the land through the Ministry of Housing, and as well as simultaneously through the Ministry of Social um, Security.
Perfect. Now, Joel, this question is for me. Uh, Very impressive numbers that you gave in terms of, households in Guyana, um, purchasing power, and so many other things. Very impressive numbers. My question to you is, do you truly feel that these numbers have a real effect on household? Do you think 70% of Guyanese are actually happy or satisfied with their cost of living and the way they're living right now in Guyana?
So we tend to look at cost of living in a one-sided way, and I made this point several times. When when I say we, I'm referring to commentators and media houses that run weekly surveys on cost of living. They look at cost of living in terms of price changes for certain commodities in the market, but they ignore two things. They ignore all the measures which, if you quantify all the measures that the government has implemented to contend with cost of living issues, it's in excess of $300 billion annually. In excess of $300 billion annually. If you quantify all, I don't want to enumerate all of it here because we're already out of time. The second thing is, those same people, when you ask them how price have how their grocery bill has grown over a period of time, also ask them how their income has risen over that period of time. And when I say income, your collective household income. And the data, the macro data out there suggests that income is rising at a rate that allows people to be able to contend with the price changes nonetheless. That's what the data suggests.
You
Okay.
know, these data are very impressive, and I hope that it makes financial sense and, in terms of prosperity as we're speaking of for our people.
And
With that,
one other point on that, right? I mean, the best response to that, if you come to Guyana, you just go around our society, go to the supermarket, go to the bars, go to the salon, go to the barber shop. You can physically see people everywhere. You have an entertainment event, an artist come, a VIP ticket is $35,000 or $40,000. You have 15,000 people at the stadium for a show. So we could argue all we want, but if you just come and you just go into our society, go to visit these places, you can see what is happening in the country.
so in other words, our
You can
people have
see the
gotten
people,
their
people spending,
priorities wrong.
people. I'm not. No, I'm not commenting on that. I am not commenting on that. What I'm saying, that is not my place to say that. What I'm
Right.
saying is that people are out there. People have spending power. People spending money.
People are
People
spending money. Well,
complain. People complain. Oh, the grocery basket. Oh, compared to what 30,000 could buy today. Yes, it's true. But when you go in the supermarket, I go to the supermarket every week with my wife to do grocery. Every month with my wife to do grocery, and I haven't seen people really with a smaller cart. The carts are getting bigger and bigger, right?
that's good to know. Joel, I do want to take this opportunity to thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you on the Guyana Dialogue. Again, thank you to our panel. Thank you to all of our viewers for taking the time to be here with us this evening. Until next time, I am your host, Shamiza Ali, and this is the Guyana Dialogue. Good evening,
Okay.
everyone.
Good
Thank
evening.
Good
you,
evening.
everyone. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Gang.